This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
All the way from the A, you listen to My Favorite Lesbian on BRQ.
Hey, stay locked in with your favorite lesbian on Black Radical Queer. Yeah.
Hey y'all, this is Jhavia Nicole, aka your favorite lesbian, and you're listening to Black Radical Queer Podcast, our stories on our own terms. Hey y'all, this is Jhavia Nicole. Welcome back to Black Radical Queer Podcast. This is season 2. I know that it's been a while since we've done this. Since I have brought you all another episode, I'm really excited to start season 2. And I actually want to start out this season by talking about age differences in queer relationships. Now, it might seem a little random, but I'll give y'all the background of what is like why I'm even bringing this up, okay? So I was hanging out with my cousin-in-law, some friends, some coworkers of hers and stuff like that. And we got into a conversation about Beyonce and Jay-Z. Now, this is something that my wife and I have talked about many times, but we started talking about like the age difference between Beyonce and Jay-Z. But what sparked that conversation was we were just talking about Beyonce's like work, her artistry, and her like how she display like kind of what she does and doesn't show to the public. And my cousin-in-law's coworker was saying that he didn't really he wasn't like really a fan of Beyonce like that because he felt like he didn't really know her, like he hadn't really seen like the real her. And so me being like the like counselor minded person, I was like, well, okay, I can understand that, because for me personally, I did not call myself a Beyonce fan until the Beyonce album, where I felt like she was a little bit more raw and open, and I felt like there was something I could connect to. I love a good song. I love a good party song. I love a good ballad. So that's not to say that there weren't Beyonce songs that I liked before that, but that was the first time where I could actually remember like myself listening to the album being like, oh, it actually made me more interested in her as a person. It made me feel like she as a person was relatable, which can be very difficult for someone who is like a pop icon, to feel like regular ass people can actually relate to you. It's one thing for regular people to idolize you and to stand for you and stuff, but to relate. So that made her more relatable to me. I felt like there was just some rawness and some vulnerability and some openness that I found really appealing as a listener, and that made me start paying more attention to Beyonce as an artist, and made me have more interest in her as a person. Okay, so I'll explain that. But as a counselor, I was saying that something that has always kind of something I've always kind of like given some side eye to is her and Jay-Z's relationship, because him coming into her life was that she was really young, and so I feel like they have this big age gap, and even though now, she's older, she's grown, and they've been together for all this time, I always side eye relationships that have a huge age gap where one person is like really young, whether they're in their late teens or they're in their early 20s or something. I just feel like it's a very young age. And so I always kind of questions the motives. I always question the motives of the older partner or the motivations of the younger partner, or what they may be seeking in that relationship, or what may be transpiring in that relationship. So I expressed that, I felt that there may have been like some type of grooming that took place, and that from my perspective, because of course I don't know this woman, but from my perspective, it seemed to me as if Beyonce had gone from essentially being groomed by her father to being groomed by her future husband. That as she came of age and she got older and she, kind of started to make that transition into adulthood, she went from, from Matthew being that primary like groomer that she just kind of abided by, to her entering into this relationship with a man who was much older than her. So to me, that just kind of made me side eye the relationship from the beginning, honestly. It's something that I always kind of was like, okay, I don't know about this. It seems kind of predatory, but whatever. not whatever, but just my, opinion, my perception. Okay, so we were having that conversation, and then it just, as I was reflecting on this conversation later, I thought about other conversations that my wife and I had about age differences in relationships, and we talked about our own past, and for me, I have been involved with people where I had an age gap with. So as I'm, reflecting on those conversations, I'm just thinking how does this relate to queer relationships? We see, plenty of situations where there's an older man and a younger woman, and that's pretty much like the default, that's really to be expected. Men seek out younger women for various reasons. But I was just I wonder, how does this translate to the queer community? So I started to just kind of think about that, do some research, think about portrayals that I had seen of queer relationships that had a huge age gap. And one of the things that I thought of immediately, which is random, and for some people may not even know the reference of some of the things I'm going to mention, but these are just the portrayals that came to mind for me based on media that I have consumed. So one of the things that came to mind was the show Reno 911. And for those of you who have not seen this show, it's like a comedy cop show. Niecy Nash was on it prior to, well before her doing Claws. It was, she was definitely younger. I can't even remember, honestly, at this point in time, other folks who were on the show. Just off the top of my head, I can't remember names and stuff like that. I remember the characters, but neither here nor there. So on Reno 911, there's this character who, because the cops would go out and, kind of patrol and see what folks are doing. And there was this one guy who would be out on the streets on roller skates, either roller skates or roller blades. And he would have on a crop top and these little bitty booty shorts. And he's just skating, and he's basically he was a prostitute. He would be on the corner and he's propositioning folks as they're passing by, and kind of dancing around suggestively and all that kind of stuff. And so he's doing all this, and then they show one episode where his sugar daddy comes to see him, and it's a much older man in a fur coat. He's yeah, I can't take care of you, baby, and that kind of thing. And because he had been telling the cops yeah, I have all this stuff, I have money and I have a limo, or just basically saying that he was wealthy. And the cops never believed him, because they're you're out here on the street, And so when the sugar daddy came, he had the limo, and just, was yeah, come on, of course I'll take care of you, and let's go. We're going to go fly off somewhere, go do something. And that just stood out to me because their relationship, they had a huge age gap, and their relationship was transactional. And, in the show, he was basically kind of fuck you, dad, basically to his parents, just kind of forget y'all, I'm out here living my best life with my sugar daddy. But they had this big age gap in this transactional relationship. And that's nothing, against sex work or anything like that. I'm just thinking about the portrayals I've seen of either homosexual or lesbian or whatever, homosexual in general, or any type of queer relationships that have a huge age gap, whatever the type of relationship is. Okay, so that was one of the examples that I remember. I also remembered an example that I saw in this movie. This movie came out in 95, but I saw it probably early 2000s, or mid 2000s. And it's called The Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love. And I am pretty sure that I have mentioned this movie on this podcast before. I actually really like this movie. It is just it's cute, it's cute. And I think we need more cute stuff. Everything doesn't have to be so deep and serious, and or everything doesn't have to be about slavery and crime and hate and, oppression and stuff like that. So, but anyway, in this movie, why am I blanking on her name right now? Her character's name was Evie, but Nicole R.E. Parker. Nicole R.E. Parker was in it. And then the actress who played Tina on the L Word, whose name, she's so embedded in my mind as Tina that I cannot remember her actual name. So, but we just gonna go with Tina, because I don't want to have y'all waiting on me to go search for her name. So Tina's character, she played a young woman named Randy. Randy was tomboyish, androgynous, lived with her aunt and her aunt's girlfriend. So she lived in a queer household, and she helped her aunt out as a mechanic. Okay. So early in the film, there's this scene where it's like Randy is in the bathroom with another woman, this chick named Wendy. And Wendy and her are like making out and kind of, being touchy-feely and stuff in the bathroom. Was it? I'm pretty sure it was the bathroom. If it wasn't, it was like just off somewhere, like Wendy came to the shop to come see Randy. And so they're kind of just, fooling around or whatever. And so Wendy is a married woman. She's an older married woman. And mind you, Randy's character is in high school. So Randy is like, it's supposed to be their like senior year in high school. So she's like 17 or something. And, Wendy, I don't know how old, they don't say how old Wendy is, but Wendy appears to be probably in her 40s. Okay. So they're fooling around and, they have this whole little secretive kind of fling relationship thing, situationship going on in this film. And it's kind of what it starts with. And then once Randy meets Evie, who is Nicole Ari Parker's character, then they hit it off or whatever. They end up becoming friends, end up really liking each other. They come from totally different backgrounds. But basically, once she, met Evie, her attention turned to Evie and she wasn't really checking for the older woman anymore. So that's like how that relationship came to an end. So they didn't like focus a lot on that relationship. It was just kind of like the beginning where she was kind of in her life in the beginning before Evie came into her life. Okay, so, but I remember, first seeing this film and being like, what the hell, this high school girl and this grown ass woman, that was a hot ass mess to me. So yeah, I was just like, that's a problem. But I remember those particular portrayals of these relationships with huge age gaps. And they just really, I was like, that's not okay. Like, you got this grown married woman who's coming to the shop, fooling around with this young girl. And then like, and then too, Randy's character was like always afraid that the husband was going to show up. And like the husband was, being all aggressive towards her and stuff. And I'm just like, this is so fucking inappropriate. Like, she's a child. This is a grown ass woman. And this is how they're engaging. So there was, some stuff at play there. Okay. So those are like two older examples, like older shows, or movies or whatever that I saw that I remember, kind of that dynamic being into play, that kind of that big age gap dynamic. And in one situation, it was kind of more transactional. And that guy who was on the roller skates, rollerblades, whatever, he was more he was older, he was grown. So even though he had this huge age gap with the his sugar daddy or whatever, he was grown. Like, he was unambiguously like he was in his 20s or something. Versus Randy's character, who was in high school, who was a teenager in high school, and this grown ass married woman. It's different situations to me, just different, I just think that as an adult, what business you got with a child? But I digress. So, okay, so those are two older examples. I want to give a couple of like current examples, like shows that are currently on. Okay, so one show where I've seen this play out with this kind of queer relationship with a huge age discrepancy is in the show Grownish. For those of you who don't watch the show Grownish, Grownish, it stars Yara Shahidi, and Grownish is a spinoff of Blackish. Blackish is the show that has Tracee Ellis Ross, Anthony Anderson, and a whole host of talented ass people. So yeah, they have their show Blackish. The spinoff is Yara's character, because Yara is one of Tracee and Anthony's kids. She's the oldest, so she goes off to college. And so Grownish is the spinoff of her like college experience. In college, she has like her crew, all right, like her girls. One of her girls is named Nomi. So mind you, these are all like freshmen in college. So they're all, like 18, type situation. Maybe, 19 or whatever. So, but yeah, so they're all there. Nomi, same age as Yara's character. Nomi takes a class. Nomi is, okay, so when she gets to college, she's already like, she identifies as bisexual. She is out for the most part. She's not out to her parents, but she's out to her peers. Her peers know that she, that she's bi. But in the show, I will say she does predominantly engage with women, with girls, like, her age and stuff like that. And I honestly can't even think of them showing any relationship like her having a relationship with a guy so far in the show. So, yeah, and I guess I should have done a spoiler alert. I just thought about that for these current shows, but yeah, so a too late spoiler alert. But anyway, so yeah, she, she predominantly like engages with girls. She's kind of a bit of a player, or just kind of very casual, that kind of thing. So they show her go to this class. She starts learning from this professor who, is very like, knowledgeable about, queer issues and like feminism and all this kind of stuff. Very socially aware, blah, blah, blah. So she just kind of is soaking up everything that this professor says. And eventually they end up starting a relationship. So they start messing around with each other. And basically they have a whole ass relationship on the low. It's in secret. And it doesn't come to light for anybody else until Nomi is kind of doing this, secretively. And it comes to light because Yara's character, she ends up seeing Nomi and the professor, what's her name? Professor Houston. And Professor Houston is actually played by, which I can never remember her name because she's always Shane to me, but the actress who played Shane in The L Word. She's always going to be Shane to me. And yeah, I actually meant to look up, these folks' real names. Because I remember like the character names and I forgot to look up their real names. Don't hold it against me, okay? But yeah, so Shane is who plays Professor Houston. So anyway, so Yara's character, she is in a restaurant. She's working at the restaurant, and she basically, just happens to see Nomi and Professor Houston in the restaurant, and she sees them talking all close, and she sees them kiss. So she confronts Nomi, her friend, about this relationship, and she's like, she's old, dealing with this old ass woman. Nomi gets defensive, and she's like, we connect, and blah blah blah, and and continues to pursue continues to engage in the relationship. Okay. So there's that situation. That's a current example. And then another current example of a show that's on now. So spoiler alert, Pose. For those of you who watch Pose, if you are not caught up, spoiler alert, this ain't what you want to hear, okay? But yeah, so in Pose, there ends up being like this, fling or whatever, between Pray Tell and Ricky. And so they have a huge age gap, and they, the family, so like Blanca and Damon and just everybody, like they actually end up having a conversation about it, or just, some things coming to light. And Electra is like, you're an elder, telling Pray Tell, you're an elder, blah, blah, blah. So they do kind of get into this blow up over it. But yes, Ricky and Pray Tell, have their relationship or their fling or whatever. And they have a big age gap, even though Ricky is technically grown. Okay. So in those examples, two that were older and two that are current, in two of the situations, you have, someone who is an adult, but they still have this age gap, this big age gap with the person they're involved with. In the other two examples, the folks are teenagers. Now, Nomi is, I guess, at the age of consent, but, the show is called Grown-ish for a reason. She's not grown. And she is still technically a teenager. She's like 18 or something. So that's still teen. You don't suddenly, develop adult sensibilities at the age of 18, even if people think that. It's just bullshit. So, so we have those examples, of these relationships that are not hetero, and there's a huge age gap. And so, I just started like thinking about, how prevalent is this? I started thinking about like my own history. I started thinking about, could I think of any other media or whatever? But when I think about like my own background and the people that I've dated, I dated someone who, the person I consider to be like my first love, I dated them and we had a 3 or 4 year age gap, like 3.5 year age gap or whatever. But in addition to that age gap, we also had the difference in terms of when we first got involved with each other, I was in high school and they were in college. I was like a senior, and they were, already in college. So we have that age difference. Even though it's a few years, it's still like very formative years and times where we're in very different places in our lives or whatever. And then another time there have been situations where I've had like flings with folks who were older than me. And then my last kind of like serious relationship prior to my current relationship, we had a 7-year age difference. Okay, so I recognize that I have definitely been involved with folks where there was a big age gap. And it's something I had not given a whole lot of thought to, honestly. Not like for real. It's just something like I knew and I just didn't think about it too deeply. But in like my wife and I having conversations about it, she was like, well, because we were talking about age gaps and stuff and predatory behavior. And so she was like, well, with the folks that you were involved with, you don't think that was predatory? And when I tell you, like, I had never considered that. I had never considered it until she brought it up. And it was something I really had to think about, because she was like, oh, well, you talk about like, your first love fondly, or you talk about, such folks fondly, or you talk about this person who not necessarily in a fond manner, but not, necessarily factoring in the age gap too and what role that may have played. And she didn't say it exactly like that, but that was the gist of what she expressed to me. And I was like, you're right. Like I had to think about it, because I didn't think about like, oh, well, is it a predatory type of situation or anything like that? And I do feel like, in the case of, like, it's particularly my first love, because that's the relationship that I would primarily talk about in a very positive manner. I can't say that I felt like, it was predatory, or like there was anything in particular they did to like manipulate me or to like, monopolize off of our age difference or off of the difference in the place we were in. However, and I don't feel like that's the kind of person they are. However, I will also say that just based on how our relationship progressed, we just may not have gotten to an opportunity for that to happen, because when they expressed wanting to kind of be more serious and almost kind of like a quote unquote settle down, I ended the relationship because I was like, I do, love you, but I am not ready for that. And so I think that, I don't know, things could have possibly progressed a different way if I was like all for that. And, I could have been in a situation that may have been very unbalanced, and where I'm like, basically my age and me being younger is being capitalized on. That could have happened. I just don't think that particular relationship got to that point, because when it got to a point where I felt like the difference in our lives, like, was really critical, because prior to that, I'm like, okay, I'm finishing up high school, they're in college. But my experience was kind of non-traditional, because I would leave school and go to work. So I was already like accustomed to balancing school and work. And that was something that they were doing as a college student. I had my own money. So I wasn't relying on them to like, quote unquote, take care of me. So we didn't have that at play. And because like, it's not like we lived together or anything, I was staying with my mom, and then I eventually moved out and got a place, but like I had my own, stuff. And, so like when we go out, it wasn't like, they're always covering everything, or they're, doing all these things financially for me. We negotiated like the time we spent together, based on what worked for both of us. So I recognized that there was some parts of my experience that may not be the case for the average 17-year-old, because if you're a 17-year-old and you're dating like a 21-year-old or a 20-year-old, and they're in college and they're working and they have money and they have their own place, then you may be in a position to where you become reliant and dependent on them. And I think that that's far more common. It's far more common to be in a situation where it's like this person is a little bit more established, especially as queer people. Let's say if we're dealing with troubles at home, if we don't feel accepted in the home, then, it's like, oh, well, I'm with this person who is already established. That can be an escape. I can go to this person. And some people do take advantage of that. They use that in an opportunistic way, because they're like, well, you can come stay with me, or, you can hang out here. I'll take care of you. I'll get you the things you need. For a teenager who's still relying on their parents, that gives them this possibility of independence that they didn't have before, right? So I feel like it absolutely has the potential to be that kind of situation. For me personally, it was just different because my experience was kind of non-traditional. But when we got to the place where they, were talking about, wanting to quote unquote settle down, is the best way I can describe it. I was like, well, no. And I think that had I said yes, that would have put me in a position where I could have been taken advantage of. I could have been, very dependent on them because, because of the kind of age dynamics at play. However, I did later on go through the experience of having a big age gap with someone, and I felt like they were more established, and I feel like they held that over my head. And it was a very toxic relationship, and I do feel like that played a factor, even though initially I did not think so. It took, time. Of course, hindsight is 20/20. It took time for me to reflect on the relationship and be like, wait a minute, with my ex, with my last, relationship before my current one, we had the 7-year age gap. And so when we met and when we started dating, well, not when we first met, but we actually met some years before we actually started dating. But when we started dating, I was 21. I was 21. I was in college. So at the time, she was 28. She was already into her career, had her own place, had her own car, that kind of stuff. And when we initially met, I was staying on campus. So I went from staying on campus to her saying, hey, just come, which actually it wasn't even outright just come live with me. Initially, it was kind of just, oh, well, summer was coming up. When we started dating, it was around April. It was around my birthday or something. So I had just turned 21. And so the semester was almost over. School is out in May. So we would be hanging out all the time over the summer. So May, I was still doing some stuff and I was finishing up at work. So around June, that's when I started going to her house, and she would be like, oh, well, by the time we got to July, she was like, oh, well, you've been here a lot last month or whatever, and we spent a lot of time together. So let me go ahead and it started out with a drawer. Let me give you a drawer so you can keep some stuff over here. You don't have to keep bringing stuff back and forth, because I was staying with my mom, and so I would just pack a bag, and come and go to my girlfriend's house, and I would go back to my mom's house. And so she was like, oh, you could just leave some stuff here, or I can get some stuff for you to have another set here or whatever. So it started like that. And honestly, it just kind of gradually over time, I would be chilling with her. I would need something. It would be at my mom's, and we'd get it. And she'd be like, oh, you could just leave this at my house. Oh, you could just, so, she kind of gradually moved me in, essentially. And then once I had all of the stuff that I used on a regular basis, once all of that was at her house, she was like, well, most of your stuff is here anyway. You might as well go ahead and move in the rest of your stuff. So that's how that happened in that particular relationship. But I feel like in terms of our age difference, so there was that at play. And of course, for me, I was in a place where I moved out the house when I was 18. I had my own place for a couple years. And then I ended up moving to switch schools. And when I switched schools, I ended up going from being in an apartment to a dorm. And so that was a different experience for me. And I was working, all this kind of stuff. And I felt very disconnected from my peers because I did not have a traditional type of experience. And so I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to stay on campus. And so, I during the summer I was going to stay with my mom and stuff, but I also was used to having my own space. So it was difficult for me to go back home after having, those years of my own space. And so I feel like, my girlfriend at the time definitely took advantage of that. Whether it was malicious initially or whatever the case, or whether it was predatory initially, I have no idea. But I know that she knew, because I would express to her just kind of my frustrations. And so she used that as an opportunity to, move me on into her house. And then we had a very unequal relationship in terms of power dynamics because she was just in a different place. I had worked for as long as I could remember. And then she was like, well, you've been working all these years, you don't have to work. So the summer that I moved in with her is essentially because by July, I eventually moved in sometime after 4th of July because, y'all, this was crazy. But basically, so I told y'all she had I had been hanging out with her. She had been gradually bringing my stuff. For 4th of July, I went back to my mom's, and me and my mom and my sister, we planned, we had a family thing we were going to do. Go out of town, go see my grandmother. So it was a little road trip. And so that was the first time I had been away from my girlfriend at the time since we had gotten together. And when I tell you, when I got back, she was like, oh, I don't want to be, she was like, said something to the extent of like, that was really difficult. Like, I didn't like being apart from you, and kind of use that as the catalyst to fully move me in, to like get the rest of my stuff. So when she came, cause I spent some more, like when we got back in town and I spent some more time with my mom and my family and stuff, when my girlfriend came to pick me up, she basically was like, oh, we could go ahead and like, get the rest of your stuff and blah, blah, blah. So that's how that, transition. So anyway, yeah, we have very unequal, power. I say that to say we had unequal power dynamics because of resources. So I'm now living with her. I do not have like a car or anything like that. By this time I had already got my diagnosis for my vision. So I wasn't driving, and I wasn't working because the job I had been working was a campus job. And, I was going to like get, a job to work over the summer. And she was like, you've been working, since you were like 14, like you should take a break. So it was that kind of thing. And so I ended up going from having all this stuff to do and having a lot of autonomy and independence to being dependent on her, living in her place, reliant on her for resources. So her for transportation, because the bus and stuff didn't come. I had to go walk very far to get to a bus or anything where she stayed. And she wasn't even out on the boonies. She was just in a part where the neighborhood, they did not want the bus to come in their area. So it didn't. But that's a whole other situation. So yeah, so I was very reliant on her to get around. I was reliant on her for, like my resources because like she had the money. She was establishing her career. So I think it just created, and then that relationship went on to be a very toxic, abusive, manipulative situation. And I feel like all of that set the tone. I had no idea. I was 21 years old. So I was quote unquote grown, but there was still some stuff I just did not know. And so when I look at these relationships that are portrayed in real life, because there are real life relationships that are like this, I just wonder, like, to what degree can this person consent if they are under a certain age? I know we have the age consent, but there's just some stuff that a person who is much older is going to know that a younger person is not going to know. So when you look at the relationship, like I mentioned with Nomi and Professor Houston, you got a girl who's 18 years old and her professor who grown as hell. Her professor's like, I guess it's supposed to be portrayed as being in her 30s or so. She grown as hell. So you have this girl who is, all smitten with this professor, and they have a very unequal power dynamic. And the professor is like, just keep it secret and, doing all this kind of shit. And so it's just really messed up. And, it's the same thing with in the Incredibly True Adventures, Randy's character is like with the married woman. The married woman's like, kind of keep it on the low and, don't tell anyone. And I'm sneaking around with you. And they paint it out to be like it's this exciting thing. And, oh, I just have to be around you. I just have to get this time with you so much that I'll sneak around to do it. But the fact that you're even doing this in a secretive, sneaky way in the first place shows that there's something that's not right, something that is just absolutely not right about it. And so it's just something that I think about in terms of these age gaps, right? So I was like, let me do some, do my homework and stuff. I saw that, relationships with big age gaps are called May-December relationships. I didn't know what the hell that was. I never heard of that shit before. So I was like, what is it? Based on what I looked up. Basically, a May-December relationship is a relationship between two folks where one person is considered a winter. And by winter, it means that like they're in the winter stage of their life. They're considered old. I don't know if it's a reference to their hair changing to like gray and white. I don't damn know, but that's what it's considered. And then the other person who's younger is considered to be in the spring if they're of their relationship. They're young. The spring of their life. They're young. So that's why it's called May-December. I don't know who came up with this shit, so I don't know, y'all. But that's what I kept seeing pop up, like, oh, May-December relationships, blah, blah, blah. All right, so then I was like, okay, what are some other examples of couples who have these huge age gaps, specifically queer couples? Because it's just something that, and when we think about the rhetoric around it, it focuses mostly on relationships between older men and younger women. That is like the norm. But I'm like, what about for queer folks? So I found out that apparently Calvin Klein, who is 76, has a 31-year-old partner. Ellen DeGeneres and Portia de Rossi got like a 15-year age gap that I didn't realize that their age gap was that much. Ellen is 61 and Portia de Rossi is 46. Sarah Paulson from like AHS, and I mainly remember her from AHS. She's been on plenty of other stuff, but that's what's standing out to me right now. Her woman is like 76. So they have a 32-year age gap. Rachel Maddow is 46. Her woman is 61. So, we got like folks with big age gaps. And I was looking at a particular article. It was like a pride.com thing. I'll include links to stuff. You already know how I do. But I saw, a couple that had as much as a like 50-year age gap, like 89 and 39. And I was just like, what in the world? So for me, depending on how long these folks have been together, if they got together when the younger person, like for instance, if they're like, oh, well, it was, who was it? It was it Rachel Maddow? I think so. I think Rachel Maddow and her partner, when they got together, I think Rachel was in her 20s. So when I look at that, I'm like, okay, so yeah, y'all been together for a long time, but what are the power dynamics at play in this relationship if a 40-year-old woman or 40-something-year-old woman was in a relationship with a 20-something-year-old when the relationship started? It's just something that I wonder about. So I was like, okay, well, is an age gap even more prevalent in like queer relationships than it is in straight relationships? I tried to find research on it. I didn't find a lot of stuff. I found this like article about a survey that was done in Allure magazine of all places back in like 2013. So it's old, but based on them surveying readers, they found out that basically queer folks were more likely than straight people to be attracted to people who were 10 years older than them. And I'm just like, okay. And they kind of speculate in this this publication called Autostraddle. They kind of like speculate on why that may be the case. They were saying, oh, well, maybe, maybe there's a big age gap because in the queer community, we're not necessarily conforming to the same standards of attractiveness and beauty. So for instance, like if a queer woman is like more androgynous, more butch or whatever, then she may not be held to the same standard as a woman who is femme. And so she can still be considered attractive and desirable when she's older. Or like with men, it's like, oh, well, there's a whole like segment of people who prefer like older men or who are looking for like a silver daddy or, that kind of thing. That's his own type of like relationship and stuff. There's a lot of instances where that age difference and being older is seen as being more attractive, more desirable, and that kind of thing. And so that was really interesting to me. I have my own theories about some of this stuff, particularly in situations where the relationship is entered into and the younger person is, let's say, under 25. And then they're involved with someone who has 10 plus years over them. And I'm including myself in this, or even 5+ years over them. But I'm including myself in this because like even at the age of 20 something, or 20, I think I was exactly 20. I dealt with someone who was like 15 years older than me or something like that. So just, out here. But I think that there's a lot of things that factor into those kind of relationships. For queer folks, particularly, I feel like especially folks who are kind of in that, what's considered, like young adult, 18 to 24-ish range, we deal with a lot of oppression, a lot of, ostracism as queer folks. And so I think that if a queer person has been, disowned and kicked out and stuff by their family, that they may be seeking a parental type figure. Someone who's going to give them love, someone who's going to accept them. And so, and if this person is older and they're more established, then they're able to provide things that that person's parent is refusing to provide them because they've ostracized them. So if you've literally been kicked out of the house and it's like, oh, well, this person who is more established is going to be more likely to house me, and provide for me and love me in that way than someone who's my age, who doesn't have those resources. And so I think that it puts queer folks in a more precarious situation. Like it puts us in a situation where we're more likely to seek out those relationships because of the things that we're lacking. I also think on the flip side, for someone who has been disowned, who's been kicked out, who's had to grow up fast and who's very used to doing shit on their own and not really having connections to other people, not really being able to rely on people and stuff, and just growing up fast. I think that, you know, having a younger partner may be appealing because it may feel like another chance at youth, another chance to have this carefree, fun type of thing going on that they did not get to have because they were just trying to damn survive, you know? I feel like those things factor into it. I feel like some stuff is just straight up predatory. So I don't excuse, like, just if you just like you're seeking out younger folks because you're a fucking predator, you know, that's its own thing. But I think there are a lot of things that factor into kind of why we date the way we date and who we're attracted to. And so that's just what I was thinking in terms of outside of just, oh, well, you know, what's considered attractive is more flexible or whatever. Not that. I just think that we experience such a disconnect because of our queerness that we seek out certain types of connections to fill that void. So we may seek out that older person to fill that loving, caring, providing, nurturing thing that we did not get. We may seek out that younger person to kind of, you know, almost like relive youth vicariously through them. And so I just think it's something very interesting. It's something I'm curious to know what other people think about. Like, I guess, this phenomenon. And yeah, like, is it something that you notice? Do you notice a lot of queer couples that have a huge age gap? And what role do you think that age gap plays? I will say that I think as folks get older, the gap starts to matter less. For instance, I think if one of the people is, you know, late teens, early 20s, it makes a huge difference. Because absolutely, if they're a child, it's just wrong, period. So that's why I'm not even like going there. But if they're like in that 18 to 24 range, I feel like it's a little sketchy, you know. But I think as someone gets into their 30s and stuff, and then they're dating older people, not to say that there can't be some of the same issues operating, but I think that the likelihood of it being a kind of predatory type situation decreases as the folks get older, even with the, you know, the age gap and stuff like that. So yeah. So anyway, welcome back. That was like just something that had been on my mind, and with me seeing these recent examples in media of these relationships, is something that I wanted to speak on, and I want to know you all's thoughts about it. Like, what have you noticed in terms of age gaps in queer relationships? You know, like, do you feel like it's more prevalent than in straight relationships, or less prevalent? What do you think are some of the reasons behind that age gap and stuff like that? All right, y'all. I've been talking for a while. Hopefully this makes up for the hiatus. Yeah, it's just something that's been on my mind. And something I think that's important to talk about too, because I do think we are dealing with it from a unique perspective based on our life experiences as queer folks. So that's it. I think I'm for real done. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Welcome to season 2 of the podcast. I'm excited to be back. And yeah, we gonna keep it moving. That's all I got. So until next time, y'all. Bye. Black Radical Queer is a ManeHustle Media podcast hosted by Jhavia Nicole. BRQ is produced and edited by Charmaine Fury, and the show's theme music was created by The Brothers Records. You can connect with us on Twitter or Instagram at Black Rad Queer. That's BLK RAD QWR. You can also connect with us on Facebook through the Black Radical Queer Podcast Facebook fan page or the BRQ discussion group. You can get Black Rad Queer merch on teespring.com/Black Rad Queer, BLK RAD QWR. And you can leave a voicemail, call in, ask a question, those types of things on the BRQ Google Voice line. And that number is 937-601-8647.
ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.